Everyone, and welcome to the May 7th edition of Pathways to Parenting Success. Tonight's topic is how to talk to your kids about difficult topics. Before we get started, I would just like to thank our sponsors, our partners, the Boulder Valley School District, and Channel 22 for making this show possible. So tonight what we're going to do is we're going to hear from 3 different panelists who will provide different perspectives on how to talk to your kids about difficult topics. We encourage everyone in the audience, as well as those of you watching at home, to submit questions to our panelists. For those of you watching at home, you can submit questions by going to www.psychologicalservices.com and clicking on Submit Questions. To get us started this evening, we're going to start with Dr. Jan Hittleman. So the intent of this evening's session is, as parents, we are frequently faced with difficult topics with our kids, and sometimes it's hard to know where to start. So we'll talk a little bit about some strategies and some tools that we can use to initiate those conversations with our kids. Beginning with Dr. Jan Hittleman, who is a licensed psychologist with over 20 years of experience in working with children and families. Dr. Hittleman has authored monthly columns for The Camera, the Boulder Valley School District under the sponsorship of the Parent Engagement Network, and online for Rosen Publishing Group. He is the founder of the Boulder Counseling Cooperative and the director of Boulder Psychological Services. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you, Leisha. It's good to be here. I'd like to just talk about communication techniques, because I think that if you have strong communication techniques with your children, those will serve you well with difficult topics as well. So I'd just like to touch on a few main points, and then perhaps we can talk more about it when we get questions from our audience here and at home. One of the first pieces of advice that I'd like to offer, and this is something that we all do as parents, is to rethink our style of communication with our kids. Too often, we tend to lecture to our kids. And believe it or not, when you lecture to your kids, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, they don't really listen very much. They typically tune you out, they nod a lot, they appear to understand what you're saying, but I don't think that they're really following along. And so we really want to rethink that lecturing format. We really want to have more of a two-way conversation with our children. And these techniques, by the way, are techniques that we should be using throughout our kids' lives, not just when they're adolescents, but when they're young as well. The other piece of advice that I'd like to offer, which is something else that most parents do, is when we're having an issue with our child, because sometimes discussing a difficult topic might relate to some recent behavior that they engaged in that we have issues with. Consider the timing of that conversation. Too often, we have this conversation in the heat of the moment. When we're pretty upset, we're pretty escalated, we get our kids escalated, it becomes kind of non-productive. So you want to think about that too. It's fine to say to your child, I'm really concerned about this behavior, we're going to need to spend some time talking about it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be right at that moment. Sometimes it's great to take that opportunity for you and your child to reflect a little bit on what happened and what needs to be discussed before regrouping and having that conversation. It's also very important as parents that we have not just a conversation about a difficult topic, but ongoing conversations, ongoing communication. We know from research that parents that have ongoing communication with their children about at-risk behaviors have children who engage in those behaviors less frequently. We've seen this consistently in research, whether we're talking about substance abuse or other issues. We know that ongoing communication is a key to reducing at-risk behaviors. And no matter what your child's age, rest assured that your opinion is very important to them, even though they may not act like it is. And they're really looking for your approval. This, in fact, increases as they get older. And so what you say really is meaningful, and it does have a significant impact on your child. The other strategy that I would like to suggest is really focusing on increasing your skills in the area of listening. Listening. As parents, we tend to, again, do a lot of talking and lecturing, and our kids tend to sit passively and theoretically listen to what we have to say. I always like to challenge parents with the goal of trying to listen more than talk. It's sort of an impossible goal in a sense, but it's something that we should really work on. So if you're going to have a conversation with your child about substance abuse, for example, a great way to start is to share that you've learned some things about it, it's something that you've been thinking about it, and you're really interested in your child's opinion on that. You're really interested in hearing from your child as to what their opinion is. What do they see that goes on in their school or after school? What's their opinion about this issue? And I think you'll be really surprised at the kind of answers you get. A lot of times we simply don't think to ask our kids their opinion, and it's something that we really want to do more often. So listening, try to listen more than talk. Generally speaking, I really advocate respect and empowerment when dealing with our children, and even young children. You know, we all are familiar with that expression, respect your elders. And I certainly agree with it, but it almost implies that the opposite is not true. That if someone is younger, then perhaps they don't deserve respect. I certainly would disagree with that. And I can tell you, as a psychologist working with children and families for over 25 years now, kids really appreciate being respected. I could not be in the business I'm in if I did not know how to treat children with respect. And I'm talking about children of all ages, not just older children. And we want to use empowerment strategies. So when we're looking at different components of our discipline plan, whether it's curfew or other behaviors, we want to include our child's opinion. We want to ask our kids what they think the rules should be, what they think the consequences should be, and use an empowerment strategy. Oftentimes parents are afraid to do this, they're afraid of losing control, but the fact of the matter is, if you use an empowerment strategy, the chances are far greater that your child will follow through, and perhaps more importantly, they will learn to take responsibility for their behavior. If it's just being dictated to them, it really frees them up in terms of projecting blame onto the parent and not taking any responsibility. So we really want to empower our kids in terms of having these conversations. The end goal for any parent is to raise a responsible, well-adjusted, happy adult. That is our end goal. And in order to do that, when our children hit adolescence, it requires us to make a dramatic shift from control to advice. And it's a tough change because we're used to being in control as parents when our kids are younger, but this shift is very important. And instead of dictating to your child what they have to do, you want to be the good advisor, and you want to let them start to make some decisions for themselves. Even if they make mistakes, it's far better that they learn that lesson when they're younger than when they're older, so that when they're out of the nest on their own, they're able to make these kind of independent decisions on their own. That's what I have to say about that, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Jan. I just wanted to ask you a quick follow-up to what you were talking about. So one of the things you really touched on is this idea of you don't have to have that conversation in the heat of the moment, because it seems like everybody is emotional at that time. So what are maybe some specific strategies that you would recommend to parents, when they're talking to their kids, so that their kids don't think that maybe they just got away with something?
Well, one of the things that I like to suggest, I call it mutual timeout. And the strategy with mutual timeout is to say to your child, if you're upset about something, which often happens, as we know as parents, is to say to your child, I'm really upset about what you just said or did, and I'm going to take a few minutes to calm down. I want you to think about it as well. Let's go both sit in our rooms, on our beds, and think about what just happened for a couple of minutes, and then we'll regroup and discuss it further. And as a parent, you want to shift from, when we're angry with our kids, we see red. And so when you take that minute or two to collect yourself, what you want to think about is the definition of the word discipline, which is not punishment. The definition of the word discipline is to teach appropriate behavior. And so when you're calming down and regrouping in terms of what you want to talk to your child about, think about what you want them to learn, because that's really what it's all about. And just taking a couple of minutes, you'd be amazed at how much calmer you can be and how much more effective you can be as a parent, instead of everyone having to apologize for their behavior after the fact because we're too upset to talk about it.
Thanks, Jan. Before we move on to our next panelists, I would just like to encourage the members of the audience to please submit any questions you may have as they are speaking, and we will go ahead and ask those questions as soon as we get a chance to. I would also like to encourage the audience at home to submit questions through boulderpsychologicalservices.com and click on the Submit Questions button. Also, I wanted to let everybody know that there is a fundraiser for the Second Wind Fund of Boulder County on Sunday, June 10th, called Dancing for Life at Nieces in Lafayette. from 6 to 9 p.m. So our next panelist is Feather Burkhauer. Feather is a 26-year veteran of child sexual abuse prevention. Using a community-based approach, she has trained over 100,000 school children and parents. Her highly regarded workshop, Parenting Safe Children, empowers adults to keep children safe from sexual abuse. She presents across the country in homes, schools, youth organizations, parenting groups, and businesses. Feather makes a difficult topic less scary and consistently impresses audiences with her knowledge, commitment, and warmth. Feather has recently co-authored the book Off Limits, A Parent's Guide to Keeping Kids Safe from Sexual Abuse, a parenting book that will change the way you think about keeping kids safe. Before founding Parenting Safe Children, Feather managed a regional chapter of the Child Assault Prevention Program, which delivers school-based curricula to protect children and teens from bullying and sexual assault. A licensed clinical social worker, she also holds a Master's of Social Welfare from the University of California. Feather.
Hi, Lisa. Hi, everyone. Tonight, I am going to talk about a topic that most people would rather not think about, and that's child sexual abuse. Excuse me. I know that child sexual abuse can be really scary to think about, and most parents feel like it's daunting and overwhelming. But the good news is child sexual abuse can be prevented. And parents go to great lengths to keep their kids safe by using car seats and bike helmets and stair gates over stairs so toddlers don't tumble down. So why is it that parents don't go to the same lengths to protect children from sexual abuse? Over 25 years, parents have told me that they just don't know how, or that it's uncomfortable to talk about, or they don't think it's going to happen to their children. Well, the fact is, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused by the time they are 18 years old, which means in a school bus driving to school in the morning with 30 children on that bus, 10 to 12 of them will be sexually abused by 18. Or in a graduating class of 1,000 students, approximately 150 to 350 of those seniors will survive sexual abuse by their 18th birthday. So talking about sexual abuse with kids is just as important as talking about other safety issues like water safety and bike safety and car safety or drugs and alcohol. And the good news is that talking about sexual abuse with kids and having these seemingly difficult conversations doesn't have to be as difficult as one might think. They come through giving children body safety rules and concepts of body safety and through boundaries. And it's not about telling kids that bad people hurt children. It's about giving them these boundaries. And thankfully, children present teachable moments and opportunities to talk to them about these things every day. So some of the body safety rules and boundaries that I encourage parents to teach are things like, you're the boss of your body. You get to choose whether or not you want to hug and kiss people. No one's allowed to touch your private parts, except if your private parts are sick or hurt and the doctor needs to look at them and I will be in the room with you. You let your child know you will be in the room with them, or to help you stay clean and healthy. You teach children that they don't touch other people's private parts and that no one is allowed to show them pictures of naked people or take pictures of their private parts. We can teach kids that they have the right to privacy when they're bathing and toileting and changing their clothes, and that when they play with their friends, they play with their clothes on, and that you can have lots of surprises in your family, but you don't keep secrets. And these are the kinds of body safety rules that we can teach kids, and most importantly, if anyone ever breaks these body safety rules, you give your children the permission as well as the language and the right to say no and to tell a trusted adult. And when discussing these kinds of topics in direct and honest ways without scare tactics, conversations about sex abuse can be turned into empowering conversations about your kids' safety. And they're critical to have. They reduce children's risk. And so I just want to offer one or two ways to approach these topics. So a great way to start a conversation with kids about body safety is through teachable moments and through what-if games. And like I said, thankfully, kids give the opportunity through these teachable moments every day when we look for those moments. And so some teachable moments, examples of those are things like two little girls pretending to pee like boys, or two little boys naked looking at their private parts together, or when your daughter says to you, "Daddy, is that your tail?" pointing to your penis. And these are excellent opportunities to review children's body safety rules with them and nurture their sexual development. And if we as adults are willing to talk to kids about these topics, hopefully they will never have to think about them. And then the what if game that I suggest parents can play with their kids are hypothetical situations where we can practice with kids what they might do in a variety of situations. Like, let's say you're on a sleepover and your friend wants to play a naked game with you. What could you say? What could you do? Or what if your babysitter asks you to keep secrets from your parents? What could you say? What can you do? And these hypothetical situations can prepare children to get help and to respond and to take care of themselves and speak up if they're faced with some of these compromising situations. And I always like to say when I'm speaking to parents, once again here, if we are willing to think about sexual abuse, then maybe kids never will have to. And it really is a parent's responsibility to, even though these conversations can feel daunting, to learn how to do this in fun and empowering ways. And I'm open to any questions people have about the approaches and the fear or the discomfort that they might have in having these conversations.
Thanks, Feather. When you were speaking just now, you talked a little bit about younger kids. What advice would you give to parents when something comes up in the media and has received a lot of media attention, like the Penn State situation earlier this year? What advice would you give to parents in talking to older kids?
Well, my advice is always be direct and be honest. Just tell the truth. And I think, like Jan said, when you start young with children with open communication, those conversations aren't as difficult when they're teens. So if a kid hears the word pedophile or the word, they hear about Sandusky on the radio and say, "Mom, what's that about?" If you've been talking to them all these years through their life about these issues, it's easier. If you haven't, I would recommend being as honest as you can, giving information that is not scary to them. We don't have to tell children that pedophiles rape children. That's not the language we use with kids. We can use language like, I had a parent tell me once that her 12-year-old was in the car with her and said, "Mom, what's a pedophile?" because they heard that on the radio. And my recommendation is to tell a child that's a person who breaks kids' body safety rules. With a teen who has some of this information, you might be able to use more sophisticated language with them. That's somebody who touches children inappropriately. And then that's your teachable moment to talking with a teen about what would you do if someone approached you? What do you think about that? Or how do you feel about that? But to be as honest as possible with kids at all ages.
Thank you. So again, I would like to encourage members of our audience to submit questions to us as we're going along. Our next panelist is Lisa Check. She is currently a counselor at Angevine Middle School. Prior to that, Lisa was the Safe and Drug-Free Schools Coordinator for the Boulder Valley School District. She has also been on the BVSD Equity Cohort Leadership Team for 4 years, training district teachers and administration in creating culturally responsive schools. Lisa has presented at many national conferences, including the National Staff Development Council, the National Association for Multicultural Education, and the National Coalition for Equity in Education. She is also a national trainer for Bully Proofing Your School program and has trained schools across the country in this curriculum. Lisa was also the recipient in 2003 of the Prevention Specialist of the Year in the state of Colorado and the Colorado PFLAG Educator of the Year in 2005. Lisa.
Thanks, Leisha. Hello, everybody. It's really great to be here. Just wanted to take a few minutes and talk about, again, we're talking about difficult topics today, and I think what some of the other panels have said is true. It doesn't have to be difficult. There are a lot of things we can do to build groundwork with our children that set the stage for having difficult conversations. So I think some of the things that we do as parents, without even directly addressing a difficult topic, can support those difficult conversations later on in life. I don't want to forget that even though we are talking about this topic that, according to the Youth Risk Behavior Survey and some of the other data we have on what children are doing and what risk behaviors they're taking, the majority of children are doing really well. Most kids do well. That said, sometimes kids make mistakes, and we need to support them through that. But I never want to lose sight of that idea that all of our children have strengths, all of them have different types of resiliency within them, and that we need to never forget that even when our child is going through a difficult time. There is strength and resiliency and assets and positive in every child. And I think sometimes when we're having a difficult conversation, we forget those and we focus on the downside of things, but never to lose sight of that and to always remember that we want to continue to see that positive in our children. That said, I think one of the most powerful things we do as parents is we role model for our children. And how we role model and what we do to role model is really important. Simple example is, how do we deal with stress in our everyday lives? Our children are watching us to see how we deal with stress so that they will then figure out how they're going to deal with stress. And it's one of the main reasons that students engage in risk behaviors is because they are stressed out and they don't know how to handle it. They don't know how to cope with it. If we model how to handle stress in an effective way, it's one of the best prevention things that we can do. It's one of the best things we can do to teach our child a lifelong skill. I think one of the ways to do that is to be transparent. So if we've had a bad day at work or we're angry at something, just like Jan Hittleman said, to maybe take a moment. But I would even go so far as to talk to my child about the fact that I've had a really difficult day, and here's what I'm going to do to take care of myself and to deal with this difficult day so I can then be present for my family. And maybe that's go for a run, maybe that's take a bath, maybe that's write in my journal. But we want to begin to model those healthy coping mechanisms for our children that show the child that, okay, there are ways that I can deal with this stress in my life, and my parent can teach me how to do that. A lot of the work that I did in Boulder Valley schools was around drug and alcohol prevention. And I think there are some really simple things, again, that we can do around drug and alcohol prevention. Again, as our two other panelists said, beginning the conversations early are really important. With a primary age school child, you can talk about medicine that your doctor prescribes and how that's the only time we take something like this is when the doctor's prescribed it. And as children get older, you can start talking about drugs and legal drugs and illegal drugs and have those conversations like Jan Hittleman said about engaging in a conversation about what do you think? What do you think about this legalization of marijuana? What are you seeing at your school? What are you hearing at your school about drugs and alcohol? And just having that simple conversation with kids about what do they see, what do they hear? Obviously, if there's a family history of alcohol abuse or addiction, that's something that you want to share with your child. I've had parents tell me, oh yeah, well, we have alcoholism in the family, but I haven't told my son or daughter. I really believe that that's information that a child needs to know, that there is this in the family since there is a hereditary component. Other simple things that parents can do, I believe Feather called it the what if game. But you can begin talking to your children, especially in middle school, which is where I see a lot of risky behaviors begin. You can begin talking to your child about what if you go to a party and there is alcohol there? What if you go to a party and somebody offers a joint? What can you do? And then always give the child a way out. They can phone you. They can blame you. Oh, I have to go. My mom, my person in charge said it's time for me to go. They can say they're sick. There's all kinds of ways they can get out of a situation that they feel uncomfortable with. So again, as parents, we want to have those conversations ongoing. There's no such thing as the talk, and then we're done. There are the talks, and there are many, and there are more conversations and listening, as Dr. Hittleman said. I look forward to your questions.
Great, thanks, Lisa. I just have a follow-up question. Based on your experience in the work you did in the school district and working with parents, for parents who are uncomfortable initiating a conversation with their kids about drinking, for instance, because there's this sense that it's that everybody's doing it, even though they're not. What would you recommend in terms of starting to bring those conversations up at a younger age?
Well, again, I think it's being transparent. So, at a younger age, if for example you're having if you drink, if you have a glass of wine with dinner occasionally, you might talk to your child about that. You'll notice I'm having a glass of wine with dinner. Here's why I have a glass of wine with dinner. I enjoy the way it goes with my pasta. I'm 21. My brain is fully developed. And there are all kinds of reasons why we wait till a certain age, to the age of 21, for folks to drink. And then you can engage in that conversation with your child. You can give them information and talk to them about drinking. But really, the opportunities present themselves all the time. If you ever watch TV, if you're ever on Facebook, and there are so many opportunities to talk about drugs and alcohol in this environment and in this time. So I would just say, again, it's those teachable moments and taking those opportunities to talk to your child about what they're seeing on TV, what they're hearing at school, et cetera.
Great, thank you. So we're going to move into the Q&A portion of our panel this evening. Again, I would like to encourage those in the audience to submit any questions that you may have, as well as those of you at home to submit your questions through boulderpsychologicalservices.com and click on Submit Questions. Before we move on to that piece, I would like to let you know about the Pathways to Parenting Success workshop at the Meadows Branch Library on May 21st. That's a couples workshop for parents. The facilitator is Kat Austin, and the focus is on learning how to improve your parenting by improving your relationship. And that is Monday, May 21st from 6:30 to 8 p.m. at the Meadows Branch Library, 4800 Baseline Road in Boulder. So we have a question, I think, that follows up on this idea of opportunities to talk. Even though this is directed towards Feather, I'd like to encourage the other panelists to think about responding as well. What specific things would you answer to the example, quote, teachable moments, end quote? So when a teachable moment presents itself, what might be specific things would you, or even identifying what's a teachable moment?
Yeah, I think it depends on what the moment is. Like I gave a couple of examples for young children. To talk about body safety with kids, sometimes parents are just so afraid. How do I bring this up? How do I talk about sexual abuse without scaring children? Well, when you find two children naked on a play date, which is a common occurrence, that kids love to be naked and they love to run around looking at each other's bodies and learn the difference between boys and girls, there's your moment. There's your moment to say, guys, remember, we play with our clothes on, without punishing, without shaming, without scaring them, without making them feel wrong for what they're doing, but to redirect them, give them boundaries, and give them one of the rules that we play with our clothes on, or like I said, little girls peeing like boys, or kids looking at each other's private parts. There's lots of different ways where we can optimize the moment when children present different scenarios.
Okay. Jan?
I would like to suggest that we have a lot of teachable moments which are not when our kids are doing something wrong, but when they're doing something right. We tend to, it's human nature really, to focus on the negative and to let our kids know when they're doing something wrong. We kind of take it for granted when they're doing something right. But we know through research in terms of behavior, not just with humans, but all forms of life, that positive reinforcement is very powerful in terms of learning. And so what's really critical is to take advantage of those positive teachable moments when you observe your child doing something right, especially if it's something that you've had issues with in the past. And when they're engaging in that appropriate behavior, what a great opportunity to give them feedback. Let them know how proud you are. Be specific about the behavior that you're seeing that you want to see more of in the future. That's, I think, an opportunity that most of us miss because we just kind of feel relieved that our kids are behaving, but we never think to give them that feedback. And if we do, it will dramatically increase the frequency of that behavior happening in the future.
I think just to add to what Jan said, I think a a great example of that, again, is that concept of when your child, like Jan said, when your child is doing something positive, that we reinforce that behavior. In schools, we call that PBS, positive behavior support. It's a real basic concept. You catch the kid doing something right. And I think decision-making is a great thing to reinforce. So when your child makes a good decision, whatever that is, whether it's to do their homework first before they hop on the video games, or whether they've made a decision about food that's a healthy decision, is to point out that that process that they went through is the same process they want to go through when they're dealing with some of these more difficult decisions that they're going to deal with as they get older around drugs, alcohol, or other things. So to reinforce that positive decision making, again, to model the decision making, what you go through, your own process, I think are really powerful things that we can do with our children.
Great. And this is sort of related, I think, or I'm going to just imagine that it is. So what about talking about sex? What's the baseline for a healthy relationship, to talking to your kids about sex and to acknowledge in sexuality with a 15-year-old? Who wants to dive in on that question?
I'll start, and then I believe talking about sex with kids starts at 2 years old, 3 years old, actually. It doesn't start at 15. Sure, we can start at 15 if you've never had those discussions before, but it really begins, like we've been saying through this discussion, that it begins young. And so for a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, it's about calling their genitals the correct terminology and teaching them body pride. And it's about answering a 6-year-old's question when a little boy or girl says, "Mommy, what is sex?" Or "Daddy, how does the baby get inside the belly?" Instead of telling them it comes from the stork or fairies or making things up, that we give them the correct, honest, direct information. Give them as little as they need to satisfy their curiosity. But don't hold back and don't lie to them. And that starts young. And by 15, those conversations about sex begin way before 15 years old. Really, experts say that between 5 and 7, when a child asks about sex, they are ready to learn about intercourse and other types of sexuality when they ask and when we tell them directly.
Okay. Jan?
And just to add to Feather, the idea of being proactive as a parent versus reactive is a really good strategy. We tend to be reactive. We kind of wait for the crisis, then we try to unravel it, and it's sort of water out of the boat time. And whenever possible, like talks about sexuality and other things, it's really smart to be proactive, to not wait until your kid necessarily asks or acts out or has a situation, but when you think that it's time to begin that conversation, to begin it in a proactive way.
I actually have some resources for if it would help for being proactive to talk about sexuality with kids. And for young children, there's a book called It's Not the Stork. And then the sequel that's for 4 and up, and the sequel for 7 and up is It's So Amazing. And then the third one for teenagers is called It's Perfectly Normal. And it is about being proactive. I recommend that parents have It's Not the Stork in their children's library starting at 4.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a theme here, obviously, that we want to be talking about all of these topics. Because when we don't talk about things, it lends to that, well, there must be something wrong with this, or this must not be okay, thought that a child can have. So we really do need to talk about it. And as parents, then we have to do our research and study up and be comfortable. And that's the key, because we have to be able to say the word penis and vagina and our face doesn't turn red, or we don't, but we can, matter of fact, talk about this because it's part of life, and it's part of what our children are going to experience. Again, in the middle school, I'm seeing this with 6th, 7th, 8th graders talking about dating, what does that mean at the middle school? You know, there are lots of opportunities for parents to talk about, well, what does that mean, dating? And tell me more about that. And what does a middle school date look like? And then you can talk about a relationship and what a relationship looks like. And same thing as Feather said with those boundaries, that you know, we still get to say when we want to have any type of contact, physical contact, and when we don't. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of girls feel pressured to do things that they're not comfortable with, and have had a very difficult time saying no, that they won't do that. And again, I think that's that teachable moment. That's talking to your child about, when do I say no? What no means no? All of those things. You know, what am I comfortable with at the age of 13 as far as contact, as far as sexuality? What am I comfortable with? What is that going to look like? What does that mean for me? How am I going to feel emotionally? So it's all those aspects of what a relationship is, and the sexual aspect being one part of that. But obviously you want to talk about qualities of a partner, and, you know, what are we looking for in somebody that we want to be with, and all those other sides of what draws us to a person. And then the sexuality is just a piece of that.
This next question relates to what you said about setting boundaries. And this is from a parent of a teenager. How do you set boundaries for things like dating, curfew, driving, gift giving, etc.? Jan, do you want to go?
Yes, I would really bring us back to something that I mentioned earlier, and that is empowerment. You want to have the conversation with your child. A great place to start is to ask them what they think should happen, what they think the rules should be. This is a very powerful strategy, and if possible, if it feels comfortable for you, as best as you can, go with their ideas, even if it's a little bit of a learning experience. Go with their ideas, or say, you know, I'm not comfortable with this part, and here's why, and what do you think about that? In a sense, that communication, that conversation that you're having with your child about the rule is almost more important than the rule itself. Because again, you're teaching them, as Lisa said earlier, you're teaching them decision-making, problem-solving skills. These are very important life skills to have when they are out of the home and on their own. And so that would be my advice, to really empower your child. The other thing that I would suggest you do is jot down whatever is mutually agreed upon. Because then when the rule is broken, instead of you getting angry and upset, you can very calmly take out the piece of paper, point to it, and say, wow, bummer, you know, we talked about this and this is what we agreed the consequence would be. It's just, it takes all of the fight out of it. And again, it teaches responsibility, because then the consequence was earned by your child. They were co-pilot in determining the consequence. It's tough for them then to just project blame on mom and dad. They have to take ownership, and that's going to help them to learn from their mistakes.
Great. Feather, Lisa, do either one of you add to that?
Well said.
I'm going to let that one stand.
Okay, so this is a slightly different one. We've had some specific advice on specific topics, but I think that this also falls under the category of difficult topics. What do you say if you think your child has a friend with a serious problem? Do you call the other kid's parents? How involved do you get your own child in the situation? Lisa, you can kick us off.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome.
Well, I think it depends what the serious problem is. However, what I would probably do is model, again, what I would want my child to do. And for me, that would be following up and looking into it, and talking either to that child, or if need be, I've had parents talk to other parents about the child, and modeling for them that, you know, we do this out of concern, we do this out of the fact that this is a person that's important to us, and we point out observable behaviors, things we're seeing that make us concerned about that person, and we talk to that person about it. And I think, again, depending on the situation, I think a talk with parents is very appropriate. I've had parents talk to other parents about drug involvement with their children, depression, suicide, all sorts of things. So again, I think we're modeling that we don't just turn away and ignore the fact that somebody might be struggling with a really difficult situation.
Heather?
Well, related to sexual abuse, which is how I'm thinking about this, a common situation for an older child, a grade school child, or a teen would be to have a friend they know is being inappropriately touched, and their friend confides in them and demands, begs, coerces them in some way to keep it a secret because that child is terrified of the consequences of telling they've been touched. And what I coach parents to do in that situation, or to help their children understand that it is okay to have confidentiality and privacy among your friends when that thing does not hurt you or someone else. But if it hurts your friend, then it's not okay to keep that a secret. That's an unsafe secret. And we know that kids are so afraid for this kind of information to come out. Excuse me. So what we can tell older children and teens is that by you coming forward with this information and, so to speak, telling on your friend or going to an adult, you're really being a hero for your friend. Even though the reality is you might lose that friendship. Your friend might say, I'm not being friends with you anymore, and be devastated by you telling. But the importance when the issues are things like sexual abuse or suicide or severe drug use is that kids can be heroes for each other by standing up, even at the risk of losing their friendship. And I think that when we know about issues that put a child's safety at risk, it's important to talk to the other parent.
Okay.
But empower the child to be able to do so as well.
Jan, do you want to add anything?
It's a common and always challenging question when I get asked this, and for a lot of different reasons, for a lot of different situations. The advice I usually give includes the following. First of all, as the parent, think about what you would want the other parent to do if the situation was reversed. And more often than not, we'd want to know. And so, consider that. Sometimes, depending on the situation, I'll advise the parent to talk to the child in question and let the child know that they're going to have to talk to their parents about this unless they want to talk to their parents about it first. In other words, if my daughter comes home and says, my friend is using drugs and I'm worried about him or her, I would approach that child that's reportedly using drugs and say, look, I know this is happening. I'm going to need to talk to your mom and dad about it unless you want to talk to them first. And again, it's an empowerment strategy. It's giving them an opportunity and saying, if you want to talk to your parents first about it, just have your mom or dad call me just so I know that it was discussed, and give them that option. They may or may not choose to do it. The other thing is, it's true that part of the challenge is that kids are afraid that they're going to lose friends and be poorly thought about. But just this past Wednesday, I was at Fairview High School where we were talking about depression and suicide prevention, and a very strong young woman who's a senior at Fairview got up and told her story of her own depression and her own suicidal thinking, and how her friends told someone that she was talking about hurting herself, and how angry she was at her friends initially, but now how much she appreciated what they did. And so, long term, I think we all know what the right thing to do is, even though it's the tougher thing to do.
Great, thank you. I would like to, before we go to the next question, again, encourage the audience to continue submitting their questions. And for those of you watching at home, to go to boulderpsychologicalservices.com to submit questions. So the next question sort of relates a little bit to that fear of losing friends. And how do you teach your child to rise above peer pressure in general? Jan?
It's easier said than done. Because it depends on sort of the developmental age of the child as well. I think peer pressure is even more challenging for adolescents, even though it's certainly challenging for younger kids as well. And I think part of it actually ties into the relationship between parents and their children. My daughter used to say something to me that I always had mixed feelings about, but she said to me that sometimes when she was thinking about doing the wrong thing, and giving in to peer pressure, she would hear my voice in her head. Now, my daughter is a little neurotic, so I don't know. Is it good? Is it bad? I'm not sure. But I was comforted to know that because, in a sense, parents develop within their children what we sometimes refer to as a superego. Knowing the right thing to do, following the rules, doing the right thing. And so I think part of it kind of is connected to the relationship between parents and their children. And if your child knows that they've had these conversations with you, much like Lisa was mentioning earlier, and giving them kind of the permission, empowerment, and strength to make those tough choices, and knowing that you're there to support them, I think it makes it a little easier for them to buck peer pressure. But when they don't have that kind of connection with their parents, it's a little tougher because they're just looking for that acceptance, that peer acceptance. And again, even if your child makes a mistake, which they will, they'll give in to peer pressure on occasion, it's an opportunity to talk about it. It's an opportunity to learn from it. And I think those are great opportunities when kids are younger because when they're out of the house and they're in college, the peer pressure issues are dramatically increased. And so let them make the mistakes when they're younger, but make sure that the lines of communication at home are open enough that you can process it with them and help them to learn.
Okay. Lisa?
I think the only thing I would add is, again, that knowledge and information are important. Obviously, the relationship is important, and what Jan talked about with, that internal sense of right and wrong. And in addition to that, there is a skill piece to this. There is something that needs to be learned and taught around how do you say no? How do you do this? What are you going to do when the situation presents itself? And that's a piece that parents can, do with their children. Talk to your child about those what if scenarios. What will you say if? How will you respond if? And have them practice. Even as adults, there are times when we run through something in our head that a difficult thing that we have to do, a conversation we have to have, we run it through our head, and that way that's ready for us when we need it. So I would just add the skill building piece, and that we need practice, just like we need practice with any other skill.
Okay. Feather?
Really well said again. I think the only thing I would add to this is just a piece about children's self-worth. That, and that's not something you necessarily teach, it's something you nurture and you build in kids. But when kids feel enough self-worth and love for themselves, they have a skill to resist peer pressure. And I love what Jan said, which was that they're going to give into it sometimes, even if they have a lot of self-worth or they mostly resist peer pressure. But those are the moments to discuss what happened, how did you feel, etc. But self-worth has so much to do with peer pressure.
Thank you. So this next question is a little different, and I like this question because I think it relates back to some things that you've all touched on. As a parent, how do I become a better motivator versus a blackmailer? It's a little different. So, Feather?
I think I'd pass that on to the love and logic classes, the people who teach love and logic, which I think are excellent philosophies with kids. And I know Boulder has, especially Stephanie Ryan and lots of other people who do love and logic. But blackmail doesn't work with kids. Yeah. Jan, do you have more specifics about that?
I do. Well, it gets back to something that I mentioned earlier in terms of focusing on the positive versus the negative. The fact of the matter is that when we look at research on behavior, whether it's the poor white mouse at the university laboratory or the human being, throughout all of the research that we've done in terms of learning, we know that people learn better through positive reinforcement. They learn faster. If animals in a maze are only punished when they don't complete the maze correctly, they learn it, but it's much slower and they become neurotic. If we use positive incentives, they learn it faster and are just better well adjusted. And so, again, as parents, I think we're great at punishment. In fact, a lot of times I'll have parents call me and say, I need a new punishment, none of my punishments are working. because they're relying so much on punishment that their kids become inoculated to it. And it's a scary feeling for a parent because that's where they hold their power, is in their punishment. And we really want to shift that focus. We really want to catch that child being good. We want to use positive motivators to improve behavior. There's a book that I wrote several years ago called Parenting Essentials. It's free on our website at boulderpsychologicalservices.com, and it gives you a lot of information about how to develop some of these behavioral strategies. And the kind of rewards that I suggest that you use with children are not things. This is another mistake that we make. We reward our kids with things. The most powerful reward that you have for your children, especially when they're younger, is your time and attention. And so in the book, I talk about using what I call structured activity rewards. So instead of it being things, they can earn special fun activities with mom and or dad and or the family. And it accomplishes a lot. Not only does it really shape that behavior, and in the book there's examples of real case studies, kids with severe behavioral issues that were turned around using this strategy, but it also retrains the parents to spend more positive time with their kids. When we look at how much positive and negative interaction goes on in the average family, it's disturbing. Typically, in terms of research, it's a ratio of 10 to 1. For every one positive thing we say to our kids, we say 10 negative, believe it or not. And I think this really happens in more houses than we might like to think. And so that's something that I think we can really do something about, we can turn around. We'll be a lot happier as parents using that strategy as well. And it really focuses your kids on what we want them to do right, not just on what we don't want them to do wrong.
Okay, thanks. Would you like to add anything, Lisa?
No.
Okay. So I think we have time for probably one more question, and I'm going to choose this last one, which is sort of a substance question, because there's some things in here I'd like to hear you address in your responses. How do you convince your child not to smoke pot when all their peers and close friends are doing it? It's easy to access, and it's in all the music kids listen to. Would you like to start, Lisa?
Yes, Leisha, I would.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, I think there's a couple opportunities here. One is this concept that all kids are doing it, and the reality is that not all kids are smoking marijuana. In fact, most kids aren't smoking marijuana. If you look at the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is it out yet? The
2011, it's not out.
2011. Okay. Well, when you look at that, you will find that not all kids are smoking marijuana. In fact, most kids are not smoking marijuana. So there's one thing that you can kind of correct that misperception that everybody is in fact doing it, because everybody is in fact not doing it. I can't remember last 2 years ago when we did it, but it was 67% of students haven't smoked marijuana or haven't smoked marijuana within the last 30 days. So it's a pretty large majority of folks that actually haven't smoked. So I would say correcting that misperception is big. I think providing information is important, not scare tactics, like Feather said, but the reasons why marijuana is illegal in most cases, unless you have a license for a medical reason, and talking about what those medical reasons are. But talking about the impact of marijuana on the brain, there's a lot of research out there that talks about memory and all sorts of things that you really need as an adult and a student to keep functioning. Motivation is another one that is impacted by marijuana. So I think having those discussions. And then I think as a parent, again, we get to lay out what our expectation is. When it's something, when we're talking about legality, we talk about the fact that it's illegal, and as a parent, I don't approve of the use of drugs or alcohol for these reasons. And this is our family rule, and this is why it's a family rule. I think that's absolutely something, that's one of those boundaries that we get to set as parents.
Jan?
Well, we are very fortunate in our community because we have someone by the name of Avani Dilger. She's a licensed professional counselor. She's a certified addictions counselor. And she is really spearheading some incredible effort in the community to help our youth have a better understanding about substance abuse, the effect on the developing brain. If you want to find out more information about Avani, she runs a variety of great programs. There's a Natural Highs workshop that she offers through September School in downtown Boulder. This is a grant-funded program. It does not cost any money. And amazingly, and this gives you a sense of Avani's power in communicating effectively with adolescents, amazingly, it's not unusual for 60 kids to show up for her drop-in Natural Highs class, if you can imagine that. The other thing that I'd like to mention is this program, as well as all of the Pathways to Parenting Success televised programs, are available online. They're archive shows. And not too long ago, we did a show called The Impacts of Medical Marijuana with Avani. And I would really encourage you to watch with your child and have that generate some discussion. You can go to the BVSD website or to boulderpsychologicalservices.com. Those archive shows are available. You can watch them at no charge. Be a great conversation starter with your teen.
Okay, thanks. This, I'm going to sneak in one last quick question to Feather. Is there a healthy way for kids to run around naked together?
Yes. And I think it's up to the families involved. And so Jan said earlier, what would you want somebody, if someone else had information about your child, would you want them to tell you? So it's similar, where two children are playing on a play date, as long as both families agree that the kids can be naked and the body safety rules are being followed, the children know they don't touch private parts and they don't take pictures and the rules are being followed, that's okay. However, some parents choose to have their children be clothed because the truth is the more children are clothed when they play together, especially after 4 and 5 years old and up, the safer they are. But it doesn't mean kids can never be naked and they can't see each other's bodies and there's shame around it. It's just about giving them some boundaries to keep them as safe as we can. And also, I'd add to that, in families, some families have nudity and are perfectly comfortable with it. Other families don't have nudity, and it's really up to the comfort level in each family and the members in the family, as long as, once again, all body safety rules between siblings and adults and children and teens and children are being respected and followed.
Great, thank you. So we're getting close to wrapping up this evening, and what I'd like to do is go ahead and share some of the things that I heard as part of our conversation this evening. I think that for parents, sometimes it can be a little daunting to bring up or initiate conversations about difficult topics or tough topics, and so some of the things that I heard as strategies to take away with us this evening are to focus on empowerment, to make sure that we give our kids a voice as we're approaching these topics, to be proactive, to find the knowledge that we need to help initiate these conversations, to be comfortable in having these conversations, to make sure that we know how to practice listening, that we're available to listen to our kids, and so that they know that we're listening to them as well, to make sure we respect our kids. I think that's one of the things in my experience has been, we talk to kids about respect and showing respect to other adults. We don't always talk to our kids about how we can show respect to them as well. And the idea of making sure that we recognize our strengths. We heard it a number of times for the panelists this evening, that kids are going to make mistakes. They're going to make choices that we would wish that they hadn't made. But they have an opportunity to learn, and we also have the opportunity to reinforce that positive behavior that we would like to see, which even helps build those strengths even more in our kids. So I'd like to share those as some takeaways from this evening. I would also like to, again, announce the Pathways to Parenting Success workshop at the Meadows Branch Library on May 21st from 6:30 to 8 p.m., a couples workshop for parents with Kat Austin. I would like to thank the three of our panelists this evening, Feather Burkhauer, Dr. Jan Hiddleman, and Lisa Check, for taking the time out of their evening to be with us here today. I again would like to thank our partners, the Boulder Valley School District and Channel 2, for allowing us to run this program. And our sponsors include the Hope Coalition, Boulder County Healthy Youth Alliance, Boulder Psychological Services, the Boulder Valley School District, the Parent Engagement Network, the Boulder Counseling Cooperative, Boulder Public Library Foundation, Centennial Peaks Hospital, and the Boulder Daily Camera. One of the things that was touched on but not talked about a lot in great detail this evening was in talking to kids about depression and suicide. The Dancing for Life fundraiser for the Second Wind Fund of Boulder County will help provide resources for students, for teens who are experiencing depression or confronting suicide ideology. And that again is Sunday, June 10th from 6 to 9 p.m. at Nisi's in Lafayette. I would like to also thank all of the members of our audience for being here tonight and for submitting some great questions, and for those of you at home for taking the time to tune into us tonight. As Jan mentioned, each of these programs are archived both on the BVSD website, bvsd.org. You can look under Resources for Parents, and on the Boulder Psychological Services website. I'm Alicia Connors Bauer. I've been your host tonight, and thank you for your time and attention.